This is Writer Life, a podcast about writing, life, coffee and conversation, with Rob and John Morgan.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Writer Life. This week I'm going to look at the subject of the topic of growing together. Because as we all know, love is in the air at the moment and Valentine's Day has just passed us. And so I thought I'd take a bit of a look at that aspect of life and compare it with my youth and today's modern society. When I was a boy, we were all taught that we were all focused actually, and being told that we all had to find a partner for life. And it seems as I look at the world today that more people are interested in looking for a partner for a while. But, it's that week of the year where love is in the air, roses are selling by the millions, and chocolates are all the rage. Most restaurants are fully booked, and love is the theme that drives yet another economic boom to fill the sales registers between Christmas and Easter. It is the time of Saint Valentine, celebrated on February 14th, which historically was the pagan celebration of the Roman goddess Juno, who was the goddess of love, where gifts were given and blessings were handed out to improve fertility at the temples. The church does not officially recognise Valentine as a saint, although they are aware of the priest who married couples in secret to help them avoid the draft and from being conscripted. And when they found out, they were not happy. He was sent to prison to be beheaded. And whilst he was in prison, he fell in love with a maid who brought him his meals, and they would exchange notes of love and would sign them anonymously so that neither of them could ever be found out. They obviously were, because otherwise none of us today would actually be aware of the story of this saint of love. It's a curious thing to fall in love. It has been a preoccupation of young maidens since the start of time, of which there are many tales to be told of romance, and its power to conquer even the toughest of hearts. I think all my life I've seen people date and hook up, fall in love and settle down. Sometimes they did not make it and they broke apart, and a few wrote a wonderful story of how romance appeared to be done properly, and their love and their relationships endured. For a great many years I actually swore I would steer completely clear of all relationships. I got to admit I had one early in my life that I grew very much to regret, and I suffered a lot of heartfelt pain over the years. And so, for me, I was much happier to be an observer rather than a participant. I suppose watching the lives of my separated parents didn't really add that much to the case for marriage, as I got a ringside seat to one way of dealing with a breakup. And I think actually that did have a big impact on me and played a big role in some of the decisions that I made in my late teens to stay single forever. Although in later life, at the grand old age of 44, I actually found someone who I was able to marry and have been happily married ever since. In the years that followed my teens, I ended up sat in a chair as others talked of their lives together and the hurdles that they faced. And I learned a great deal about how people face each other in their daily lives and build the relationships that they have. In an odd sort of way, my resolute determination at that time to remain unattached and avoidant of any kind of committed relationship gave me a chance to take a back seat as a neutral observer. In a sense, I was not part of the game, so I could watch how things played out with others from the safety of my comfortable neutral zone. I actually learned a lot from talking to and watching other people, and that really helped when I had to create what would be the ideal relationship in Heirs to the Kingdom, the series of books that I put out. And It was not just for Robbie and Runestone, but I also wanted to create something that was special and wonderful for Jade and Rowan. My writing benefited in creating what was seen at the time of writing as possibly the most perfect partnership. And as much as I actually really love writing their story together, at that time I was also watching the world of romance dramatically change as I actually wrote. The greatest source of love and adoration is without doubt the written word. Young males throughout history have written small notes of love to young women that they were smitten with. Books of romance have toyed with the imaginations of young maidens, and men have read of brave deeds done by chivalrous knights to win the hand of a very fair maiden. French poets have laboured over every word to craft the perfect love poem of the classical romance age. And all of this was to drive the senses of the mind towards the utopian ideal of being whisked into a loving and caring life with that one true love who will idolize your every waking moment. It paints the perfect picture of a life that is wholesome and fulfilling. And there's no denying it is pure gold for any writer who can create the perfect scenarios within their stories and actually make them really believable. And sadly, like all fiction, the modern world has changed, and it has become harder and harder to pinpoint just where things started to actually change. This week, people will gather as couples, and yet there will probably be more that sit alone. Modern love is a very, very different thing from what is seen as the ideal. And every year there appears to be more and more people single and saddened rather than being out with their loved ones in the crowds. People are giving up on love. Hookups are far more popular, and in many countries the landscape has changed and is quite unfathomable. The young still dream of love, but their joy and fulfillment come from films rather than actually being a part of real life. Cheating websites are all the rage for those who are married, and our young would rather stay home and group chat than meet face to face. In Japan, the birth rate is falling as couples no longer want to sleep together, and in the USA, there is now a whole brand new industry being dedicated to website brides from abroad, as homegrown females have become more demanding and expect pretty much everything from the man, but are not willing to contribute anything to the relationship. Women looking for love list all of their preferences on their Tinder or other dating app, but sadly, only 2% of the male population actually fit the bill of their descriptions, of which 100% of the women are trying to snare them. It's become a very, very brutal landscape, and for the few that actually do find love, it really is not that easy, because there's no one you can trust these days. All of the old-fashioned rules of seeing a ring and not going there have just changed. They've gone, they've been obliterated, and your partner will probably be stolen by one of your own friends. It's hard to explain how all of this has happened, but the face of modern relationships is nothing like it was 40 years ago. And to be honest, the older generations have no understanding of what has actually happened. When I first began to write what became the Curio Chronicles, I wanted to show a more up-to-date idea of what a relationship can be, and also some of the pitfalls that we see today in modern life. The central theme within the series was always going to be the life of one character and how she actually saw herself, her life and her loves, and then I was going to highlight that around all of the other people who surrounded her. Abigail's life is not easy. She's grown up around the dysfunction of her parents' marriage, and it has impacted her life. So I asked the questions, could she still recognize a true and powerful love if she actually found one? Or would the relationship with her parents massively undermine her life to the actual point where she would follow the same destructive path as her mother? In book 1, which is Abigail's Summer, Abigail talks to Birch about her relationship with her first love while she was still at school. It's a guy called James, who, once he had sex with her, he left her for another girl. It is clear because of his actions that she actually does doubt her own feelings and has grown a very negative view of herself. And there's a very small part at the start of a quite traumatic scene for Abby that really is quite important. I'm here, sweetie. Now talk to me. It took a while, and I told her the story of James and me, and how we made love in the old shed behind the church, and how I thought someone was watching. It was really hard, but she was the only one I could tell because I trusted her. I was shivering and shaking, and I could not control it. I looked at her feeling ashamed of who I was. You gave your virginity to your boyfriend, so how does that involve your choir master debts? I looked down at the floor. I think he was the one who saw. I don't know. I left James and went straight to choir practice, and everything was normal. I was really happy. I loved James, so it was not wrong, right? She nodded. There's nothing wrong in what you did, Deds. That is actually normal for most girls. It's just a passing moment, but it reveals a great deal about how our young see love today, which is through the lens of self-doubt. Abby absolutely believed that she loved James with all of her heart, and yet it was not enough to keep him. Like her mother, who is dedicated all of her life to Edwin, she feels she's making the very same mistake, simply because James treated her exactly as Edwin treated her mother. Her actions dictated her feelings, because she was unable at that point to understand that he was just using her simply for sex. He wanted to score and take her virginity. And then, for him, it was all a game. But for Abby, it actually had meaning. He told her he loved her simply to get his own way, and then he left for another. And in doing so, Abby now doubts what is a genuine feeling. Now the point here is that some treat love as a game, and some also treat love as a power play to gain and manipulate using control. Pat Benatar was not wrong when she wrote the song Love is a Battlefield, because at times it can be, and I've littered those aspects of love and relationships throughout the whole of the Curio Chronicles, and I really do hope that the readers will spot them and understand them. There is a huge difference between true love and perceived love. The whole point of creating the village of Wootton Dursley and the moralistic characters who lived there was to create a perfect image of rural life and a rural community that was filled with people living life at their best in an environment where everything was utterly perfect. My aim was always to hold up a mirror to society, to highlight the hypocrisy of it all. And so within that, I had the perfect image of a close and loving couple who fitted in perfectly with all of the surroundings, which was Abby's parents. But as we now see, all is not quite as it appears to be. She took another long pull on the cigarette and held the smoke in. It was as if it was a requirement in order to answer. Her tone was bland. She is my daughter, and you may not believe it, but that is the one hope I have in her. If you were home more, you'd understand who she is and who she will become. She turned and looked at him, stood in the doorway, holding his cup. Do you even remember the girl you married, Edwin? Hell, do you even remember why you married her? He frowned. What the hell is that supposed to mean? Of course I do. I'm looking right at you." Felicity flicked her ash and shrugged. "You know, there was a time when you looked at me the way you looked at her today." Edwin gave a sigh. "Don't be ridiculous. She's my daughter. I'd never see her that way I did you back then. God, just the thought is sickening. Christ, Felicity, I cannot believe you at times." She blew out another long plume of smoke. "I was talking about Birch." Just for a second, he looked shocked. She smiled and turned back to look down at the garden. "It's all right, Edwin. She's a very beautiful girl, and she does have an amazing body. I don't blame you for looking. I won't deny, even I caught myself admiring her. I suppose when you reach our age, we admire youth more, simply because we've lost what we had." Edwin walked out of the doorway and stood a few feet to her side. He turned his head to glance at her. "I've told you before, you're too hard on yourself. You're still the best looking woman in the village. Look, Felicity, I realise I'm not an easy man to be around. I'm quite sure your wacky and meddlesome friend tells you more than often. But look what we built here. We've done fine to get this far." Felicity gave a small laugh. "Best looking woman in the village. And that's the problem, isn't it? All your little indiscretions don't live in the village, do they?" She took the last pull on her cigarette, dropped it on the floor and ground the stub in with her toe. She turned and looked directly at him, and he looked guilty. "I've got no concrete proof, but as a wife, I know these things. You just know, and you've got no idea how. I suppose being married to you, I just got to know you get to know your spouse so well it shows, and you pick up on it." He tried to talk. "Look, Felicity. No, you look. Look at me, Edwin. Open your bloody eyes for once. Take a really good look around and see what you have. Because it's only here because I've dedicated the better part of my life to maintaining all of this. You were never here." It's not exactly true love, is it? It's not the best example. The sad truth is, Felicity probably, could have had a much better life if she'd married someone else. And as we find out in book 2, she did have someone. But if she'd followed her heart, the village would never have accepted her. And so she decided to marry Edwin, who the village highly approved of, and she walked away from her true love, who was actually Hattie. As sad as it is, there's a lot of young women today who still face the same pressures, as they feel that they will be left behind, and so they rush into marriage in order to be seen as doing the right thing. It has a lot less to do with love, and is far more to do with perceived love, especially how the family and the community perceive it. How it looks is still far more important than how it actually is. The average lifespan of a modern marriage is only actually about 4 years these days. Most people find it hard to make it past 5. So if you're married and you have, well, actually, to be honest, you're doing very, very well. The majority of marriages today fail, and the divorce rates are now higher than they've ever been. Somehow, in the world today, people are losing their connection and are reading the signs all wrong as they struggle to understand who they are and what they truly feel. Now, there's little doubt Abby loved James. For her, it was a huge thing. And yet she started to doubt herself and how she really felt, because James proved he did not feel the same way. In a way, it really is so sad, because whilst her intentions and her feelings were pure, she actually became blinkered to see only her own parents' relationship and then compare hers to that in her own life. There is a lack of understanding surrounding love today. It's not taught in schools, And in the crazy world of modern life, once again we now see that sex is hitting the agenda, as it has now successfully been woven into the fabric of life for just about everything. I mean, sex is important, especially in a marriage, but it's not the be-all and the end-all of a relationship. And that is where a lot of people are falling foul. And through sex, they perceive that they're in love. We live in a world that puts far more emphasis on sex than is actually needed. And it's within that aspect of life that I actually wrote the Curios, because once again, the young teens in book 1 are of the very same notion that sex solves everything, which sadly it does not. The most dangerous aspect of love is this notion of love at first sight, which is touted from every single part of life today. It's in books, it's in movies and magazines, it's all over websites and the internet. Having spent a massive amount of my time working with people, talking to people, and learning the behavioural sciences around love, sex and relationships, for well over 25 years of my life, I came to the understanding that love at first sight is one of the many myths of the modern world. I mean, it's great to write about it, but in theory, it applies only to a very, very tiny fraction of the population of the planet. And to be honest, I actually think that the whole idea needs to be just thrown in the bin and forgotten about. Attraction is not love. It's lust, if you want to know. You meet, you like what you see, and the conditioning of the modern world, which is sex-centric, sends you into a fantasy of what it would be like to get that person into a bed. And suddenly, you are part of a huge game in life. You may have sex on the first date. You may have sex on the 10th. And people have been led to believe that is where the magic happens. But it doesn't. That is actually just one of the key factors of the Curio Chronicles. Because what that series of books will show is that love is built. I mean, it literally is, brick by brick. And it happens long before the sex, and it builds onward long after it. It is in those moments, in the run-up, and all the small interactions in between the sex that actually create the ultimate bond of two people. That is the core of the Curio Chronicles. The relationships as they start and build to what will be the final book. And in the focus, its focus is going to be only on the two main characters, which is going to be Ded's and Birch's relationship, which is why there's no sex until book 2. I wanted to show true love. I wanted to frame it in its best possible light, from discovery all the way through all the different phases to fulfillment. And at times show it in a messy way, because it's not the smooth ride that people perceive it to be. It takes commitment and understanding, and most of the time it flows very naturally from the heart. I mean, let's be honest here, love can be glorious, but it can also be a trial, and it can be heartbreaking at times, and it can also be very, very confusing, as it does challenge every aspect of self-doubt that you have. When you look at the story as a whole, Abigail and Abigail I should say, and Birch have been laying the foundations, growing closer and closer all year at university. So when they enter book 1, which is Abigail's summer, they're already in love, but are refusing to admit it. Now, choosing to write the love between two women rather than a male and a female allowed me to focus on the actual love rather than the couple, because again, I think love crosses all borders and boundaries. It's a natural thing that flows from deep inside, and I really don't think we really have that big a say in who we choose to be in love with. It kind of sort of happens unexpectedly. You meet someone, you interact, and suddenly everything changes, as they become the focus of all of your thoughts and feelings. And at times it takes something big to really, really wake you up, and for you to realize that somehow this one person means more to you than any other person on the planet. In book 2, we see Abigail, who has spent 4 years hardly seeing Birch, as she's had to come home and leave Birch to finish her doctorate and her training behind in Manchester. Her years of separation are highlighted in the book, and it paints a picture of heartbreak and pain as she finally starts to really understand and admit that yes, she is actually in love with a woman, which is something all of her friends have actually been telling her. But because of the village that she lives in, she refuses to admit it. And the truth is, when Birch returns, Abby gets the confirmation as she takes the plunge to say what's in her heart. And for her, this is a huge risk, and it's a massive step forward, which is actually the truth of telling someone how much they really mean to you. You've got to be vulnerable. It can be, and often is, a really terrifying moment, which for her is made worse as both of them have been playing the straight card for as long as they've actually known each other. I screwed up, Dads. I really screwed up big time, and all I could think of was, I need my dark little beastie. If I'm with her, the answers will come. I looked at her and sighed. While you're at it, find a few for me too. Dinner, Manchester tea, is here. Let's eat it while it's hot. I pointed behind her. Tissues are there. She started to giggle. God, I've missed this, Dads. I got it. She had no idea how much I'd missed this. I looked at her as she turned to grab a tissue, and I felt this huge surge of my truth explode inside me. I looked at her as she wiped her nose, and it just slipped out. Then stay with me, Birch, and don't ever leave me again. It's a defining moment in Abby's life as her real feelings of love blossom. But again, the road of love does not run smooth, and within the day she's cast into yet more self-doubt, which is a consequence of her mother's relationship with her father. This time, it's her best friend Debbie who's on hand to point out the obvious. Abby, she spent millions to be here. She bought a house and a business not 10 minutes walk from here. God, I thought you were smart. Abby, for Christ's sake, wake up. Don't sit there and tell me you're over her. Look at you. You have shitty hair, crappy clothes, and you've been miserable, locking yourself away. That's the bloody point. You never got over her. You never will. You two belong side by side, and everybody knows it and accepts it. What, do you think Chloe and Edwina and me have not talked about it? We have, hundreds of times. None of us understood why both of you were so goddamn stubborn, when it's as clear as day to all of us. Abby, I saw the way you kissed her back. I saw the look on your face. Why can you not just say the frigging words and admit it? Abby, you are, and always have been, in love with her. You'll never get over her. Do you think she's any different? Why the hell is she even here? There are some important moments in Curio Summer which do highlight some of the struggles all of us face in modern society today. In a sex-driven world of hookups and casual sex, the one thing that is lacking is understanding. The world has moved on, and for those who were raised in a more traditional way, they really do not fully understand. It's like they don't understand how today there's still this huge emphasis placed on the sex aspects of marriage and loving relationships. The thing is, we've created a world in which love and marriage has been defined in a very, very specific way. It is the way I was raised, and I've grown up that way. So the whole married for life and the commitment we make is a very stringent part of what is deemed as acceptable. And the most frustrating thing about that is, yet again, it's defined via the sex. If we continue to make true love all about the sex, we actually lose what I feel is the most important part of a relationship, which is actually the central theme of the Curio Chronicles, which is not actually the sex. It's actually the very real and deep meaning attached to all of the interactions on a moment-by-moment basis. Commitment and trust are far bigger players in a loving relationship than the sex. But most importantly, the biggest part of a loving bond is truth, because truth kills all doubt. Love today has been defined as a sense of ownership. You love this person, and so therefore you have got the right to dictate the terms of their body, which, as I found out when working and researching love and sex, is actually a recipe for chaos at times. As controversial as it may be, there are times where monogamy can cause all sorts of chaos and damage, as Birch highlights in Book 2, where she talks to Abigail in bed after a night of trauma with Anthony. I could hear the sadness in her voice. She really cared about people, and that was the crazy thing about living here. Marjorie hated her. But why? Birch cared deeply for people. It made no sense at all to hate her. You know, Birch, the thing I don't get is you're opposed to marriage, and yet you see so much loneliness. Is that not a contradiction? Because surely marriage is the cure. She looked at me, and her eyes looked really sad. It's not a cure, Dads. Most marriages force other people to be who they're not, and that is done through enforced monogamy, and I don't agree with it. I've seen so many where one person sets the terms and the other has to comply and feels a loss of some aspect of themselves. Look, it does work for some, but we see it as the only way as a society, and that is simply not true. There are many ways that people can raise their young or share a life. If you look at the whole of this planet, you'll find the Western ideals of marriage are but just one way. Many cultures remove shame from sex and marriage, and it works. I'm not against marriage. I'm against the ideal that society says monogamous marriage is the only way, because it's not. We now live in a world that defines love by our sex lives. One person for life is an amazing thing. The bond and intimacy it forms is wonderful. And for many, if not the majority, it is the only way that they can define their relationships, which actually, to be honest, is quite sad. As I learned when working and talking to people over a very long period of time, there are other ways to share a life, because that is what loving someone is truly about. The journey, side by side, is exactly it. And that's not always done in a bed. Love is about so much more than simply sex, and yet we're still defining our whole life around our bed partners. The divorce rate is at its highest ever, and almost all of those are caused through some form of adultery. How many marriages could be saved if the focus was more on the daily interactions and the bond building, and less about an act which is basically just a primal urge to procreate? Now, I get it, it's a massively controversial aspect of the Curios, one that most people aged 50 or above struggle to come to terms with. And I would say that a high percentage of our young are also struggling with it daily. I have seen too many relationships in my time where a ring becomes almost a receipt of ownership. And it's within the confines of that scenario I added some of the hardest parts of a person's life in love to the story of the Curios, and then I faced it head on. And I cannot deny, it has ruffled a few feathers of some a good few readers, to be honest, who simply cannot accept that a relationship without monogamy can work. I too felt the same until I had the chance to meet and talk at great lengths to people who are in polyamorous relationships. And it was actually quite mind-blowing to actually see them in real life and understand their lifestyle. You know, for those people, sex becomes less important, and the emphasis is placed fully on the actual real relationship. Communication is key, as is trust and open honesty. And for some, it works incredibly well. I mean, it really is quite a crazy scenario. But as you actually start to look at it, you find it's not quite as insane as you would at first think it is. I mean, think of it this way. If you love someone and you start a relationship, you really work at times to build something of great value. You buy a home, you do it up together, and you have children and you raise them. And you put in years and years of work to make everything run perfectly. And you're delightfully happy. Most affairs never start because of the sex. It's usually actually the last thing to happen. The simple truth is, and it is the biggest danger in any marriage, is you become so wrapped up in a daily life with kids and work and bills. The routine of life becomes stagnant, and you start to stop communicating as you once did. All of that effort with this amazing person who is the focus of life, and yet as the years drag on, you start to take each other for granted. Most affairs start because the other person treats you as your partner once did, and you've missed it, and it's nice, and so you engage. It's not for sex, because it's, in a sense, it's a reminder of what once was. This other person makes you feel like your partner once did, because your partner no longer does that. And it's never about the sex. But eventually you do get caught up in the nostalgia, and you start to act out what was once a past happy part of your life in secret with another, and you end up in bed. I've never met two people yet on the edge of a breakup that still did not love each other deeply, because they did, but they somehow got lost in the blur of life. The feelings were still there, they were just buried under piles of washing, bills, work rotas, the activities to keep the kids happy. Had the attraction slipped a little? Well, yeah, maybe it had. After all, when you have had every possible kind of sex with someone a million times, how do you find ways to keep the buzz as wild as you once did in your younger days? All of it takes is just, one minor indiscretion. And suddenly, all of those years, those long, hard years of working at a relationship suddenly come crashing down to the ground, and everything crumbles. The truth is, no one really is at fault. Life does take its toll, and staying in love is something you have to really work at. It has to be nurtured just like anything else. Some things that have always struck me about life and love is, in the moment that you meet someone and you find them more than appealing, that moment you click and you sit back after only one conversation and you think, I could really keep doing this on and on and on. At that point, which could be the start of a new life together, the truth is, you don't give a rat's ass if that person screwed half of the neighbourhood the night before. Their sex life at that point is irrelevant, because all you care about is finding out more about this person, and hopefully getting them in bed as quickly as possible. If you then fast forward 40 years, suddenly sex with another is a huge issue that destroys everything that you've built together. Suddenly, you feel you've got the right to dictate the terms and conditions of another person's life, and you act like you own them. I'm not convinced still any of us should have the right over another human being's life. We learn to let our kids grow up and be who they're meant to be, and yet we cannot do that with the person who we're supposed to love more than any other living being. And all of the blame is directed at the one who made the mistake. Nobody ever asks, well, why did they? They just blame them and then play victim and hurt. Another angle to maybe look at it is, because it has always fascinated me, is how two people who really love each other, they really care on a very deep level, separate and get divorced. And then after all of the dust settles, they become really good friends and actually still have every quality of their marriage within their friendship. They just now accept that they're having sex with someone else. If you can do that so well after a marriage, should you not have sat down, talked, and avoided all the hell and the pain that was the divorce? It really does fascinate me, and no one has yet been able to answer that one question in any significant depth that would make me understand fully why. I highlighted this in Abigail's wedding, where Felicity and Edwin meet up 2 years after their breakup, and they both have new partners at that time, and they talk for the first time since the divorce as they help with the arrangements for Abby's wedding. She really is the most wonderful woman, Edwin. Abby has thrived around her, and ultimately that's all I want, simply for her to be happy. He gave a nod. Yes, I do too. I've made a complete arse of myself, but I'm trying to make up for it. Felicity patted his shoulder softly. I actually think Angela has been good for you. He looked very surprised. You do? She gave him a nod and smiled. Yes, I do. Edwin, you could have brought her here. I would never be rude to her. Well, not now. Maybe a few years back. But God, Edwin, we're too old for all that drama and bullshit most of the world's stuck in. I really can't be bothered with it. She was once a good friend of mine. I know her faults and her better qualities. Look, we both moved on. That was then and this is now. And honestly, it's a hell of a lot easier on Abby if we're at peace. He gave a smile and he nodded at her. I think you've done very well. If I'm honest, Patrick's a nice man. I can see the attraction. He's very fun-loving and quite the twisted sense of humour. I would imagine that appeals to you rather well. Felicity gave a smile and shook her head. She started to laugh. I know you so well, Edwin. And no, it's a recent thing. Well, we've been together a couple of years, so I was not really involved with him before or during the divorce. He's far too respectful for that. I do enjoy his company though. We get along fine. Edwin gave a slight nod as he glanced across at the others mingling. I'll not deny, yes, it crossed my mind. But thank you for setting things straight. You do look good together. I do think he suits you, and I mean it when I say it's nice to see you smile more. I genuinely wish both of you well. Felicity took it in the spirit that it was given. Thank you. I appreciate that. And as you know, I'm actually very relieved to see your health is improving. Whatever happened, Edwin, it does not change the feelings. I was always glad I married you. And look at our daughter. She's the best thing we ever did. He gave a wide smile. Yes, you're right. I really am very proud of her. She is a wonderful woman. And I would love to claim the credit, but to be honest, that all belongs to you. I do see a great deal of you in her." She started to chuckle. "She certainly has your temper and a very cutting tongue. And just like you, I do have a habit of pissing her off without realizing it." He gave an almighty chuckle, and Felicity burst out laughing. He gave a loud, wheezy laugh, something she'd not seen him do in a very long time. I'm not convinced it's possible to fall out of love with someone. If you do, I would actually question as to if you really love them in the first place. The modern world appears to define love and relationships differently, and almost on a daily basis, and it does impact our young. I've seen young couples treat each other so disgracefully in the name of their so-called love for each other, making demands that I see as completely unreasonable. I know of several cases where the female made the male delete all his female friends off social media. One person hit their partner for stopping in the street to talk to an old school friend of the opposite sex. I know of many who demand to see the phones of their partners and read all of their messages, or ring them constantly wanting to know where they are or who they're with. I've come across a marriage where the husband has access to his wife's online bank account and tracks her spending, and he also transfers most of her wages to his own account when she gets paid. I've come across another who goes to parties with all his other male friends, and he does the strip club circuit getting extras, and then he screams at his wife if she wants to spend a few hours with her female friends at a pub. I know of one woman who gives her husband spending money and keeps his wallet in her bag at all times, or one that has to meet and vet all of their partner's friends to ensure that they are suitable and make sure that they are only friends that they approve of, which, to be honest, are mainly his friends. One man on the birth of his daughter was told by his wife, "We're never having sex again," and they haven't. Does she have the right to make that choice alone, without at least talking first? Surely the answer would be talk it over and then come to some sort of discreet agreement. In Abigail's wedding, I had a scenario that Birch struggles with as she comes home and cries because she fears for the young woman that she's working with, which really upsets Abby. That is one part of the book which is not fiction. That happened in real life, although I would imagine the readers would think that it was completely made up. Let me assure you, it wasn't. None of those things are love. They are control. And that is why Birch was so right when she talked to Abby alone in bed that night. Monogamy is a commitment, but it is one that few can actually stay true to, and it has become the single most problematic issue in a huge majority of relationships, which is why today so few make it past the 4 years of marriage mark, and divorce is so high. Marriage is slumping compared to 20 years ago, and to be honest, maybe that's not a bad thing if you consider how easily people use the word love to control and manipulate the situation with their partner. Maybe a break from marriage for a while is not a bad thing to allow people to really consider their thoughts and emotions. I think the world of sex has confused a lot of people into thinking that sex and love are the same thing, which they are not. It's easy to hook up and have sex. It's not so easy to fall completely and utterly in love and then walk away and forget it ever happened. Why don't we start to educate our young better so that they really understand the commitment to love that they're making? If you think about it, at an early age, most young people get a thrill from dressing up and all of the ceremony of a marriage service and the attention it creates. But do they really understand the long-term implications at such a young age. I've talked to so many couples who did not, and their fantasy of a marriage life was shattered by the reality of the expectations of a lifelong commitment they struggled to deal with. Maybe we should define love better in the media and wipe away all of these nonsensical notions of what love is and start actually talking the hard facts and teaching our young how to build something that is lasting and worthwhile. Now, true love is deep, it's felt, and it has at times to weather the storms of life, which are not always easy. There has to be communication and teamwork from both sides as you care and protect each other against the struggles of life. In both the Curio Chronicles and in Heirs to the Kingdom, I wrote about the tough times in the difficult moments because I wanted to show a real relationship, not some rose-tinted ideal that's been filtered through society. Marriage is a commitment, and maybe we do need to look at it and negotiate the terms better so that it is more suited to the individuals and not more in line with what society says is right. If there's one thing I know to be true, it is if you truly want a marriage or a long-term relationship to work, it has to be a long series of negotiation so that both of you are always on the same page. Communication is key, even if it's a difficult conversation, and above all else, it has to be an honest team affair. There are no two marriages that are the same, and as Bert shows, one rule does not fit all, no matter what others may say. And as long as there is trust, you can do anything as a couple that does not endanger the two of you being together. You know, on a different note, I've worked with a few people who struggled with an unrequited love, and they've seen a lot of pain and they've had to endure a lot as the person they love has dismissed them utterly. I've often sat back and looked at the one who's dismissed the other, and then looked at the one who is in this one-sided love. And I've always felt that being so dismissive towards someone who has such love in their heart is actually awful, and that somehow they may be better off with the person who loves them rather than the one they chose over them. To love another is a beautiful thing, but it's also destructive at times, as some people take advantage of it and they use it against you. I've highlighted the pros and cons throughout all of the Curio stories, as I show every view of how love is misrepresented in today's world. But I've also shown, as the series will reveal, the best of it. At this point, 4 books are out, and there are more to come as the story grows and the real truth of life and love shines through for Abigail in her own life. There is within all of the chaos and madness of the Curio series an incredible love story, and yet it's not the best love story that I've actually written. The purest of love also contains the innocence and care of a pure heart, and in all of that I have written to date, I feel that it belongs to a very special little character in Hans' cottage. Felix and Beradoc walked away along the path as Esme watched with tears running from her eyes. She breathed in to calm herself. "Felix, don't forget, dip the grain in the carry." He looked back and smiled and gave a nod as she breathed a sigh of relief. Esme watched him walking away and held her hands to her heart, her voice lowered to a whisper. "Please don't leave me. When the day comes and the choosing ceremony happens, I choose you, Felix. Felix, I love you." She dropped to her knees and wept, and Mugwump continued to snore. There's a part of me that feels if we all loved in the same way Esme loves Felix, the world would be a much nicer place to be in. And maybe we should all think strongly about that. Thank you for listening in today, and please remember, if you've enjoyed it and you're not subscribed to the channel, then please, put a like on the video and subscribe, just so I can push that reach a little bit wider and get a few more people listening in with all of us. As always, I like to take things apart and make people really think from as many different angles as possible. It's what I do when I'm writing a story. I pull everything apart and then I reassemble it, looking at all of the facts, and try to work that into the stories to get them as accurate and as truthful as possible and as believable as possible, because most of what I write is fiction. It's wonderful to challenge people and make them really think, and I think a good book should do that. It should really make you sit back and just take a long pause and think about your own life. And if I've achieved that with any of you listening in, then I'm thrilled, because I think if we all sit back a little more and understand a little more and think a little more, all of us will live a much better life. I'll find something else to confuse you all with next week and challenge your thoughts, and I will see all of you then. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks for listening to the Writer Life podcast. If you have enjoyed this episode, or there are areas of Robin's stories you would like him to discuss, please add your thoughts and questions in the comments, and we will include them in a future episode. You can follow Robin on all his social media links, which you will find listed below, and please, like and subscribe to this channel, so you get the latest notifications when he posts. All Robin's books are available in digital and print formats to purchase or download through all online book sales sites.